I am 26 years old and I've been living in Chicago for about 4 years. I work remotely as a graphic designer, so I spend most of my time at home, alone, in my apartment. At the time this happened, I was coming out of a pretty rough period. I had just ended a long relationship and was trying to get out more, do anything that wasn't just staring at a computer all day. A friend mentioned a small gallery in the Wicker Park neighborhood that had an exhibition open that week. Something more alternative, not crowded, more local. I'm not really into events like that, but it seemed calm, and since it was at night and close to home, I decided to go alone. I got there around 8 p.m. It was cold, that typical wind here that cuts through the streets and feels colder than it actually is. The gallery was small, dim lighting, yellowish tones, very low background music. There were maybe 15 or 20 people, spread out, quietly talking, looking at the artwork. At first, it was exactly what I needed. I walked around slowly, looking at the pieces, trying not to think too much. I grabbed a drink and leaned against a wall, just observing people. Nothing out of the ordinary. After about 20 minutes, a guy approached me. He seemed normal at first glance, maybe around 35, average clothes, nothing noticeable. He started with the usual event talk, asking what I thought of the artwork, if I already knew the artist. I answered politely, not really interested in conversation, but not being rude either. But after a few minutes, the way he spoke started to change a bit. He said something like, "I imagine you haven't had the easiest week, right?" At the moment, I found it odd, but I thought maybe it was just a generic comment. But then he continued, getting more specific, mentioning that I worked from home and that I stay up late almost every day. That made me uncomfortable, because that wasn't something obvious just by looking at me there. I gave an awkward laugh and asked how he knew that, trying to keep the tone light, like it didn't bother me. He didn't answer directly. He just shrugged and said something like, "You can tell when someone's that tired." But it didn't stop there. He started mentioning even more specific things, like the fact that I had recently rearranged the furniture in my apartment, which completely froze me because it was true. I had changed everything around about 2 days before, but I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't sent photos to anyone. I stared at him, trying to understand if it was some kind of strange joke, or if I knew him from somewhere and just couldn't remember. I asked if we had met before, and he replied with just a, "Not exactly," smiling in a way that didn't feel natural. It wasn't an open smile. It was more like he was satisfied that I was confused. At that point, I wasn't paying attention to anything else around me. The music was still playing, people talking normally, but it felt like I was isolated in that conversation. My body started to tense up, that kind of feeling that comes right before something goes wrong. I tried to cut it off, said I was going to grab another drink, and stepped away. I went to the back of the gallery and stayed there for a few minutes, pretending to look at some pieces, but really just trying to understand what had just happened. I even thought it might be someone I knew messing with me, but the more I tried to fit it into something logical, the less it made sense. When I looked back toward where he had been, he wasn't there anymore. That gave me a quick sense of relief, like, okay, it's over, just a weird guy. But at the same time, there was that lingering bad feeling, like I had missed something important. I decided I'd had enough for that night. I didn't even stay to see the rest of the exhibition, just headed to the exit trying to act normal. While putting on my coat, I glanced around to see if he would show up again, but I didn't see him. I left the gallery and the cold air hit hard, that contrast with the closed environment inside. The street was relatively empty, just a few cars passing occasionally and very few people walking. My car was parked about 30 meters away in a line parallel to the sidewalk. I started walking toward it, trying to convince myself that it had just been a strange coincidence. Maybe the guy had made generic comments and I had just connected them too much. But that feeling didn't last long. When I lifted my gaze and focused on my car, I saw someone standing next to it. Right away, I felt my stomach drop because even before identifying him clearly, I already knew who it was. It was the same guy. He was leaning near the driver's door with a relaxed posture, like he was waiting for someone. The street was poorly lit, but I could see his face well enough. He was looking directly at me with that same strange smile as before. I stopped walking automatically, like a reflex. My body froze for a second. I looked around to see if there was anyone else, any movement, anything that could help me understand the situation, but no one was paying attention. When I looked back at him, he made a slight nod like he was greeting me or confirming it was me. He didn't say anything, just stood there, waiting. I stayed there for a few seconds, not knowing what to do. The distance between us wasn't large, but it felt much bigger in that moment. I started thinking fast, trying to understand how he could know which car was mine. I hadn't mentioned it inside. I hadn't used my keys in front of him. Nothing. And even if he had followed me, he would still have had to guess among several cars on the street. It didn't make sense. I thought about just turning around and going back to the gallery, but the idea of crossing paths with him again inside that enclosed space didn't seem good either. My heart was racing. I could feel it in my chest and even in my neck. I pulled my phone out of my pocket discreetly, like I was just checking something but really thinking about calling someone or even faking a call. While I was hesitating, he finally spoke. His voice was calm, low but clear in the silence of the street. He said something like, "You always park closer to the corner, right?" That hit me in a way that's hard to explain because it wasn't just strange. It was too specific. I really did tend to park closer to the corner on that street when there was space. It wasn't always the exact same spot, but it was a habit. I didn't respond. I just stared at him, trying to process it. He took a small step toward the car, not exactly toward me, but enough to put me on alert. At that point, I wasn't trying to understand anymore. I just wanted to get out of there somehow. I unlocked the car from a distance just to see if he would react, but he didn't even look at the sound. He kept staring at me like it wasn't new to him. That's when I decided not to go straight to the car. Instead, I slowly started stepping back without fully turning my back on him, trying to keep distance. I thought about crossing the street and going somewhere more lit, maybe a bar or anywhere with more people. While I was doing that, he didn't follow me, which was strange in itself. He just stayed there watching me. But there was a moment when he raised his hand and lightly pointed to my pocket, where my phone was, and said something like, "It won't help much, you know." That froze me again. I hadn't shown that I was going to call anyone, but it felt like he already knew exactly what I was thinking. I turned fully and started walking faster, crossing the street without even properly looking at the cars. My focus shifted to getting away as quickly as possible. I entered a bar on the next corner, a simple place with bright lights and louder music. As soon as I got inside, I felt immediate relief, that feeling of being somewhere with people, noise, movement. I went straight to the back, ordered a water just to have an excuse to stay, and kept discreetly looking at the door. I expected to see him walk in at any moment. I stayed there for about 10, maybe 15 minutes, trying to calm down and think about what to do. When I finally had the courage to look back outside through the window, he wasn't there anymore. Not near my car, not on the sidewalk. The street looked completely normal again, like nothing had happened. I stayed inside a few more minutes, trying to decide if it was really over, or if I was still being watched from somewhere. The sense of safety I had felt when I entered the bar slowly faded, replaced by that constant doubt. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he spoke, always one step ahead of what I was going to do. After about 20 minutes, I decided I had to leave anyway. I waited a bit longer, then left the bar carefully and looked both ways before heading to my car. This time, there was no one nearby, no sign of him. I unlocked the car, got in quickly, and started the engine. I locked the doors immediately, almost by reflex. Before leaving, I stayed there for a few seconds, checking the mirrors, looking for any strange movement, but I didn't see anything. I drove home faster than usual, without turning on music, just trying to focus on the road. During the drive, I had that constant feeling of being followed, even though I didn't see any suspicious car. I got to my building, parked in the garage, and went straight up to my apartment. I locked the door, checked the windows, did everything almost automatically. The silence inside the apartment felt heavier than usual that night. I tried to distract myself, turned on the TV, scrolled on my phone, but I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept going back to the conversation, to the way he knew things that didn't have a simple explanation. At some point later, I picked up my phone to check notifications, and that's when I felt a real chill. There was a new message from an unknown number. No saved name, nothing. Just a short sentence. "You got home faster today. I stared at the screen for a few seconds without reacting. The message had no errors, no emojis, nothing. Just that sentence. The first thing I did was immediately look at the apartment door, like someone could be on the other side right then. Then I went straight to the living room window, which faces the street, and pulled the curtain aside slightly. There was no one down there, just a few parked cars and the dim streetlight. Even so, my whole body went on alert. I went back to my phone and opened the conversation. The number had no photo, no history, nothing. I thought about replying, asking who it was, but something stopped me. It felt like a terrible idea to show any kind of reaction. A few seconds later, another message came in. You always look out the window before trying to understand. At that moment, I felt a different kind of fear, more physical. My hands started sweating, my breathing became shorter. I didn't remember making any noise other than pulling the curtain, and still, he knew. I slowly stepped away from the window as if that would change something and went down the hallway to check the rest of the apartment. Everything was exactly as I had left it, but that didn't help at all. The problem wasn't someone being inside. It was someone knowing too much from the outside. I went back to the living room and stood in the middle trying to decide what to do. I turned on the lights in every room, as if that would give me some sense of control. I picked up my phone again, went into the settings to see if there was any strange app, anything that could explain it, but there was nothing unusual. Then the third message came. There's no point checking the phone. I felt a kind of panic that wasn't just fear. It was that sense of having no control over the situation anymore. I immediately turned off Wi-Fi, then mobile data, as if that would stop anything from continuing. The phone lost connection, but I still couldn't calm down. I paced back and forth in the apartment, trying to think of something logical, some explanation that didn't involve someone watching me in real time. I thought about leaving, going to a friend's place, but at the same time, the idea of stepping outside again completely froze me. I ended up sitting on the couch with all the lights on, just trying to wait for it to pass. The silence was only broken by the low sound of the TV that I wasn't even paying attention to. I don't know how much time passed, maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. At some point, I heard a faint sound coming from the apartment door. It wasn't a knock, it was more like a quick touch on the handle, almost like someone testing if it was locked. I froze instantly. I stared at the door, trying not to make any sound. A few seconds later, it happened again, this time more clearly. The handle being gently forced, slowly. It wasn't someone trying to break in. It was someone checking calmly, as if they already expected it to be locked. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I picked up my phone again, even without internet, ready to call 911, and then it vibrated in my hand. Even without connection, a new message appeared on the screen. I know you're not going to open. Story 2. I am 22 years old and I study at a university in Columbus. When this happened, I was in finals week, so I was staying later on campus than usual. I live about 25 minutes away from the university by bus, and since I don't have a car, I rely a lot on public transportation, especially at night. On that specific day, I stayed studying in the library until around 11:30 p.m. I was already tired, with a headache from staring at the screen and reviewing material for so long. When I left, the campus was already pretty empty. That strange late-night silence with few people walking and almost no movement. I walked to the bus stop just outside, near a larger avenue. The lighting was weak with a few spaced-out streetlights and the wind was very cold. I waited about 10 minutes until the bus arrived. When the bus stopped, I could already see it was almost empty. I got on, paid the fare, and quickly looked inside. There were only 2 other people at the front near the driver, and the rest was completely empty. I chose to sit more toward the middle, by the window like I always do. The bus started moving and soon there was that constant sound of the engine and vibrations, very repetitive. I leaned my head against the glass, trying to relax a bit, watching the streetlights pass by. After a few minutes, at one of the stops, someone got on. I didn't pay much attention at first, just heard the door open and close. But when I glanced lightly at the reflection in the window, I saw it was a woman. She walked down the aisle quietly and sat a few rows behind me on the opposite side. Nothing strange so far. I went back to looking forward and tried to ignore it, but for some reason I became more aware of my surroundings after she got on. The bus was too quiet, just the sound of the engine and the slight vibration of the glass. I could faintly see her reflection in the window beside me. She was sitting still, looking forward. She didn't seem to be using her phone. She wasn't doing anything. I thought it was a bit strange, but still within normal. A few minutes passed and the bus made another stop. No one got on, no one got off. When the bus started moving again, I, without really thinking, looked again at the reflection in the glass. That's when I noticed she wasn't in the same place anymore. Now she was 2 rows closer, still on the other side of the aisle. I hadn't seen her stand up, hadn't heard footsteps, nothing. She was just closer. At that moment, I thought I must have been distracted. Maybe I just didn't notice her changing seats. I tried to ignore it and went back to looking outside. But that feeling that something wasn't right started to grow. My body tensed up without me noticing. I decided not to look back for a while, just stay calm until I reached my stop. But a few minutes later, I ended up looking again, this time slightly turning my head, trying to be discreet. And she was closer again. Now she was practically in the row right behind mine, still on the opposite side. The way she was sitting hadn't changed. Straight posture, looking forward, completely still. What bothered me the most was not remembering seeing her pass by me at any point. At that moment, I was no longer comfortable. I stayed facing forward for a few seconds, trying to decide if there was a simple explanation or not. I thought maybe she was changing seats at stops and I just wasn't noticing, but it didn't fully make sense. I hadn't heard footsteps in the aisle, or the seats creaking, nothing. And the bus was quiet enough that I would have noticed any movement. I started paying more attention to the reflection in the window beside me, trying to follow her without turning my body. I could faintly see her back there, still, as if she was doing absolutely nothing besides sitting. The feeling that started to build was strange, like when you realize something isn't right but don't yet know exactly what. I decided to test something. I waited a few seconds, took a deep breath, and turned my head quickly back toward where she was. But the moment I did that, the seat was empty. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to understand if she had crouched down, moved to the other side, anything. It didn't make sense that she could have disappeared from that spot in such a short time without making any noise. I looked further toward the front of the bus, searching for her in other rows, and that's when I saw her. She was now much farther ahead, almost near the section where I was sitting. Not right next to me yet, but close enough for me to be sure the distance between us was shrinking without me understanding how. My body reacted instantly. That alert feeling hit hard, like when you realize you need to get out of a situation, even without fully understanding it. I stayed still for a few seconds, trying not to draw attention, but at the same time trying to track her through the reflection. She was still there in the same posture, not looking directly at me, but too close. I thought about standing up and moving toward the front, near the driver, but something held me back. It was like I didn't want to cross the aisle past her. I tried to act normal, picked up my phone, pretended to look at something, but really I was just trying to buy time and figure out what to do. My breathing was shorter, and I started noticing small details like the cold air coming through the window and the closed, stale smell of the bus. A few more minutes passed and the bus continued almost empty, with no one getting on or off. I looked again at the reflection in the glass, and she wasn't there anymore. That made my stomach drop instantly. I didn't turn my head right away. I stayed facing forward for a few seconds, trying to prepare myself. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, I didn't see anyone in that row, or in the rows behind. Just empty seats, dim lighting, everything too normal. That didn't bring relief. It did the opposite, because there was no way she could have just disappeared. I started looking further ahead, further back, searching for her anywhere on the bus, and there was no one there besides me and at the front, the driver. At that point, I wasn't trying to understand anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. I pressed the stop button even though I was far from my actual stop. The sound of the signal echoed in the empty bus in a strange way, louder than usual. The driver glanced in the mirror but didn't say anything. The bus started slowing down and I stood up before it even fully stopped. I didn't want to look back again. I just focused on the door, waiting for it to open. When it finally stopped, I got off quickly without thinking much. The cold air hit my face and I felt immediate relief, that kind of "it's over" feeling. The bus stayed there for a few seconds and then drove away. I took a few steps forward, still tense, and out of reflex I looked at the bus door, that large glass reflecting some of the streetlight. That's when I felt it again. In the reflection of the glass behind me, there was someone standing. The image wasn't perfect, but you could clearly see the outline of a person, very close, like less than a meter away from me. I froze instantly. The strangest part was that I hadn't heard anyone get off with me. I hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard the door open again. And when I quickly turned around, there was no one on the sidewalk. Just the empty street, silence, and the bus already pulling away. I looked back at the glass and there was nothing there anymore. I stood there for a few seconds trying to understand if it had just been an illusion caused by the reflection and the streetlight. My heart was still racing, and that feeling of someone being close hadn't gone away. I started walking faster, glancing around, trying not to look desperate but already unable to stay calm. My house was still about 10 minutes away, so I didn't have much choice but to keep going. The problem was that as I got farther from the bus stop, the street became emptier and darker. Some houses had their lights off, a few parked cars, no movement. At one point, I had a very clear feeling that someone was behind me. It wasn't a clear sound of footsteps, but that kind of presence you notice without being able to explain it. I suddenly stopped and turned around quickly, trying to catch anything out of place. There was no one, just the empty street, dim lighting, and the wind passing through. I stood there for a few seconds looking, maybe expecting to see someone stepping out from behind a car or from a shadow. But nothing happened. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination after everything on the bus. I turned back and kept walking, now even more alert. That's when I noticed something strange in the windows of the houses along the street. In one of them, the glass reflected part of the street and the lighting. And for a second, as I walked past, I saw the reflection of someone behind me again. It wasn't clear, but it was enough to recognize the same silhouette. Story 3. I am 29 years old and I live in Indianapolis. At the time this happened, I had just gotten a job at a 24-hour pharmacy, one of those big chain ones that stay open all night. I really needed the job, so I accepted the night shift without thinking too much about it. It was my first job on that schedule, so everything was still new to me. The pace, the silence, the feeling of being awake while the rest of the city sleeps. That week I was in training, but I'd already been assigned to work directly with another employee, Jake, who had been there for a few years. On the night this happened, it was just the two of us in the entire store. He was at the register and I was organizing some shelves and learning the system. The pharmacy at night is completely different from the daytime. The lights are bright, but the place still feels too empty. The long aisles full of products stay silent, and any small noise echoes more than it should. I was in the back, organizing a section of basic medications, trying to follow a list Jake had given me. At one point, while I was checking the boxes, I heard a faint sound of movement in the aisle next to me. It wasn't loud, more like someone handling products, adjusting things. I thought it was Jake, even though he was at the register. I didn't find it strange at first, just kept doing what I was doing. After a few minutes, I leaned a little to look through the gap between the shelves into the next aisle. That's when I saw a man in a uniform just like ours handling the products. He had his back to me, putting some boxes in place, moving calmly like someone who already knew exactly where everything was. At that moment, I just thought it must be another employee I hadn't met yet. Maybe someone who had come in earlier and I hadn't noticed. Since I was new, I assumed there could be people I hadn't been introduced to yet. I went back to organizing my section without paying much attention, but it stayed in my mind because Jake had been very clear that on that shift, it was just the two of us. A few minutes later, I heard Jake calling me from the front, asking for help with the register system. I went over quickly and asked him about a third employee who was organizing the aisle. He looked at me with a confused expression and asked what I was talking about. I explained that there was a man in the back in uniform organizing the shelves. He frowned immediately and said that that night, it was only the two of us on the schedule. I even thought he might be joking, but he didn't look like he was. On the contrary, he seemed uneasy. He said maybe it was some manager who had come in without warning, but the way he said it didn't sound convincing. We stood there for a few seconds, not really knowing what to do. I said I could go check again, and he came with me. We walked through the aisles in silence. Just the sound of our footsteps on the floor and that constant hum of the fluorescent lights. When we reached the aisle where I had seen the man, there was no one there. The shelves were neatly arranged, everything in place like someone had just finished organizing, but there was no one. I felt a strange chill, because I had clearly seen someone there just minutes before. Jake looked around carefully and asked if I was sure about what I saw. I said yes, that there was no way it had been anything else. We started walking through the other aisles, checking each one, going all the way to the back of the store and even into the stock area. Nothing. No open doors, no sign of anyone. Jake tried to stay calm, but you could tell he was getting uncomfortable too. He pointed out that if it had been someone from outside, they would have had to pass by the register, and he hadn't seen anyone come in or leave. The only entrance was the front, and he had been there the whole time. It didn't make sense. We ended up going back to the register trying to act normal, but the atmosphere had completely changed. I couldn't focus on my tasks anymore, and every time I heard any sound from the aisles, my body went on alert. After a while of trying to ignore it, Jake suggested we check the cameras just to be sure there wasn't anyone else in the store. The monitoring room was in the back. Near the stock room, a small room with several monitors showing the aisles, the register, and the entrance. We went in, and he started rewinding the footage from a few minutes earlier. Exactly around the time I had seen the man, I stood beside him, staring at the screen, waiting to see the man appear at some point. The cameras covered almost all the aisles, so there wasn't much way for someone to move around without being seen. Jake went through the footage slowly. We saw ourselves walking through the aisles, organizing things, going to the register, but there was no one else. At no point did a third employee appear. Not entering, not leaving, not walking between the shelves. I felt that discomfort growing again because I knew what I had seen. It hadn't been a shadow, it hadn't been quick. I saw him handling things calmly like any person would. I even asked Jake to rewind to the exact moment when I had looked between the shelves. He rewound it, and there I was, standing there looking. But in the aisle next to me there was no one. We stayed silent for a few seconds, staring at that frozen image. I was clearly there, looking at someone who simply didn't appear in the recording. Jake let out a quiet, "This doesn't make sense," more to himself than to me. I started trying to rationalize it, saying maybe there was some blind spot, some angle the camera didn't capture well. He immediately shook his head and said he knew that system, and that the entire aisle was covered by the cameras. He even switched to another monitor showing a different angle of the same spot. Still nothing. No person. No unusual movement. We left the monitoring room with that strange feeling, like we had missed something important. We went back to the register, but now the silence of the pharmacy felt heavier. I couldn't go to the back alone anymore, so I stayed near Jake, pretending to help with simpler tasks. At one point, while I was organizing some bags behind the counter, I heard that same faint sound of products being handled again, coming from one of the nearby aisles. I froze instantly. I looked at Jake, and he had heard it too because he looked up immediately. We didn't say anything, just listened. The sound was subtle but continuous, like someone picking up boxes and putting them back. We looked at each other for a few seconds, and this time there was no discussion, no attempt to explain. Jake stepped out from behind the register first, and I followed right behind him, keeping a bit of distance but not wanting to be alone at any moment. The sound kept coming from the aisle, steady, unhurried, just like before. When we turned into the aisle, the noise stopped immediately, instantly, and again. There was no one there, just the shelves all aligned and that heavy silence returning. I felt a chill run down my entire arm. Jake took a few steps into the aisle, looking around as if still expecting to find someone hidden there. We stayed there for a few seconds, not knowing what to do, until he quietly said it didn't make sense to keep ignoring it. He suggested going back to the cameras again, but this time watching in real time. We went quickly back to the monitoring room, closed the door behind us, and stared at the live monitors. The aisles were all empty, no movement. Just the bright lights and the still scene. I started to feel a little dizzy, like my mind was trying to process something that didn't fit. Then, on one of the monitors, Jake subtly pointed at the screen. It was the aisle we had just been in, and the boxes on one of the shelves were moving. I stared at the screen, trying to understand what was happening. It wasn't a sudden movement or anything exaggerated. It was small changes, like someone picking up a box, adjusting it, putting it back. But there was no one there. The entire shelf was visible on camera, and yet things were shifting position. I felt a strong cold drop in my stomach, the kind that freezes you in place. Jake didn't say anything for a few seconds, just stared, his body rigid. There was no denying what we were seeing. It wasn't imagination, it wasn't a reflection. It was happening right there in front of us. Then on the monitor next to it, something different appeared. It was the side aisle, and for a very brief second you could see someone passing between the shelves. You couldn't see the face or clear details, just the uniform and the movement. I reacted immediately, said "there" out loud, and Jake rewound the footage a few seconds to try to catch it better. But when he rewound it, there was nothing. No sign of anyone passing. It was like it had only appeared in that exact moment. The silence in the room grew heavier again, but worse this time. Because it wasn't just me saying I had seen someone. We had both seen something on the cameras. We stayed there for a few more seconds, staring at the monitors, waiting to see if it would happen again. But everything went back to normal. No movement, no sign of anyone. That's when Jake said it had gone too far to ignore and grabbed the radio to try to contact the store manager, even though it was the middle of the night. While he tried to make contact, I kept staring at the screens, unable to look away. At one point, I had the feeling that someone was right at the edge of one of the camera frames, as if just out of view. It wasn't clear, but it was enough to make me even more tense. Then came the part that stuck with me the most. On the monitor showing the aisle closest to the room we were in, the back door appeared reflected in one of those convex mirrors mounted on the ceiling. And in that reflection, you could see a person standing right in front of the monitoring room door. Someone outside. My body went cold instantly. I slowly turned to look at the actual door behind me, and at that exact moment the handle moved slightly, as if someone was testing if it was locked. Jake stopped talking on the radio immediately. We stood there in complete silence, staring at the door, not making a sound. And then the radio, still in his hand, crackled on its own for a second, and a low voice came through very close to the microphone. "No need to look, I'm already here." Story 4. I am 34 years old, and I recently moved into an apartment in Detroit because of work. I'm an industrial maintenance technician, so I ended up getting a job at a company in the area and had to move quickly. The building I moved into is old, one of those brick ones with narrow hallways, worn carpet, and a constant smell of old wood mixed with something slightly damp. It's not a bad place, just clearly old. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment, and from the first day I noticed that the sound insulation isn't very good. You can hear footsteps in the hallway, doors opening, even some louder conversations. Nothing unusual for an old building. But things started getting strange in the very first week. Always during the early morning, usually between 2 and 3 a.m., I would start hearing movement in the apartment next to mine. At first I thought it was just a neighbor with a different schedule, maybe someone who works nights. There were sounds of footsteps, light ones going back and forth, sometimes something being lightly dragged, like a small piece of furniture or a chair. It wasn't constant, but frequent enough to wake me up a few times. What bothered me wasn't the noise itself, but the timing and the pattern. Always in the middle of the night, never during the day. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was normal apartment living, but as the days went by, it started to bother me more than it should have. After a few days, I began paying closer attention to those sounds. It wasn't just that it happened at the same time. It felt like there was a pattern to the footsteps, like the person was walking in circles or repeating the same route inside the apartment. I started waking up automatically around 2 a.m., almost expecting to hear it. I would lie there in silence, just listening. Some nights it felt like someone stopped right at the wall that divided our apartments, as if they were standing on the other side. There was one time I even got up and placed my hand against the wall, trying to feel any vibration or movement. But I felt nothing except the cold of the concrete. One night, after about 5 days in a row of hearing it, I decided to go into the hallway to see if I could find the neighbor. It was almost 2:30 a.m. when the sound started again. I got up, threw a jacket over my shirt, and opened my door slowly, trying not to make noise. The hallway was empty, lit only by the yellowish wall lamps and that typical late-night silence. I stood there for a few seconds listening, Then I heard a soft click coming from the door of the apartment next to mine. Before I could react, the door opened slightly, and a man stepped out. He closed the door behind him carefully without making noise and stood there for a second before looking in my direction. He looked to be around 40, average appearance, nothing that stood out right away. He was wearing simple neutral clothes like someone who had just stepped out without much thought. What bothered me immediately was the way he avoided making direct eye contact. His gaze always seemed to pass by me, like he was focusing on something behind or beside me. Even so, he started a conversation normally, asking if I also had trouble sleeping in that building. His voice was low, controlled, but there was something about it that didn't quite fit. I answered politely, said I had just moved in and was still getting used to the noises. I asked if he had lived there long, trying to keep the conversation normal. He took a moment to respond like he was carefully choosing his words. He said something like, "Long enough to know the place." It wasn't a direct answer, and it made me uncomfortable. I tried to bring up the nighttime noises, said I sometimes heard footsteps coming from his apartment. He stayed silent for a few seconds and then replied vaguely, something like, "Old buildings always make noise." At no point did he confirm it was him. The conversation continued awkwardly for a few more seconds. I tried to ask normal things about the building, the neighborhood, anything to make it less strange. But all his responses were indirect, always avoiding what I asked. At no point did he tell me his name, nor did he ask mine. And the way he stood there in the hallway, not really looking at me, started to genuinely bother me. It was like talking to someone who wasn't fully present. At one point, I asked directly if he lived in the apartment next to mine. He paused again and simply answered, "Sometimes I'm there." That gave me an immediate sense of discomfort. It didn't make any sense. Before I could ask what he meant, he just took a step back toward his apartment, as if the conversation was over. No goodbye, no explanation. He opened the door, went inside, and closed it quietly. I stood there in the hallway for a few seconds, trying to process it. The silence returned all at once, heavy. I didn't hear any more footsteps, no sounds from inside the apartment. Nothing. After a while, I went back into my apartment, locked the door, and stayed awake for a long time, trying to fit it into some logical explanation. The next day, I left early to take care of some work things and ended up running into the building manager near the entrance. He was an older guy, the type who knows everyone in the building. We started talking out of politeness, and I took the chance to mention the neighbor in the apartment next to mine. I talked about the nighttime noises and mentioned that I had seen him in the hallway early that morning. The manager looked at me in a strange way, confused, like I had said something that didn't make sense. He asked for the apartment number, and when I told him, he stayed silent for a few seconds before responding. He said that apartment had been empty for months. He said the last tenant had moved out earlier in the year, and that it hadn't been rented again yet. I thought he might be mistaken, so I insisted, described the man I had seen, even the time it happened. But he firmly denied it. He said no one had a key to that apartment except management, and there was no record of any new tenant entering. That left me completely speechless for a moment. I tried to laugh it off like it was just a misunderstanding, but the feeling that followed wasn't relief. It was worse, because I knew exactly what I had seen the night before. That night I went back to my apartment already with that information in my head. From the moment I walked in, the place felt quieter than usual. I tried to act like nothing had changed, went through my routine, had dinner, turned on the TV, but I couldn't relax at all. Every small noise in the building made me alert. I kept glancing at the wall that separated the apartments as if I expected something to happen. And it did. Right around 2 a.m., the sound started again. Footsteps. Slow, measured, going back and forth. But this time it was different. It wasn't just distant noise. At one point, the steps stopped right near the wall. And then I heard something I hadn't heard before. A knock. A single dry knock, like someone tapping their knuckles against the wall. I froze completely, sitting on the couch, staring directly at that spot. A few seconds of silence and another knock, this time clearer. My entire body tensed. I tried to convince myself it could be pipes, the building settling, anything. But it didn't sound like structure. It sounded intentional. I stayed there, not knowing whether to make a sound back or pretend I hadn't heard it. My body was tense, like any movement could make things worse. After a few seconds, there were 2 more knocks, a bit faster now, still in the same spot on the wall. Not loud, not aggressive. It was rhythmic, like someone testing, waiting for a response. I even thought about knocking back just to see what would happen, but something stopped me. It felt like if I responded, I would be confirming something. The knock stopped for a few seconds and I started to think it was over. Then I heard a faint sound like something being dragged on the other side, very close to the wall. I stood up slowly and took a few steps closer, trying to listen better. My heart was beating so loudly it made it harder to hear. I placed my hand against the wall again and felt a faint vibration, almost imperceptible, but real. Like someone was right on the other side, very close. And then right near where my hand was came 3 quick knocks in a row. I pulled my hand back instantly, like I had been shocked. After that, the silence returned, even worse than before. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the wall, trying to understand if it was over or just a pause. I didn't have the courage to get close again. I just stayed there, silent, listening. A few minutes passed. Nothing happened. I started thinking it might be better to leave the apartment, go somewhere, anywhere with people. But it was too late for that, and the idea of opening the door and facing that empty hallway didn't feel safe. I slowly walked to my apartment door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, as always, with that yellowish light and heavy silence. But while I was standing there looking, I heard a sound behind me. It wasn't from the wall this time. It was from the door of the apartment next to mine, opening. I froze instantly. I didn't move, didn't take my eye off the peephole for a few seconds. And then in the metallic reflection of the peephole itself, I could see movement behind me, like someone standing right next to my door in the hallway. Story 5. I am 24 years old and I work the night shift at a 24-hour diner in Tulsa. It's not the kind of job I planned to have, but it's what came up at the time and I ended up staying. The shift starts at 11 p.m. and goes until 7 a.m., usually after 2 or 3 a.m. First, business practically disappears. It's just me, another coworker in the kitchen, and the silence of the place, with that overly bright lighting and the constant hum of the machines. I've gotten used to it. The routine of cleaning the counter, reorganizing things, waiting for a customer to show up every now and then. On the night this happened, everything was normal. Cold outside, empty parking lot, only a few streetlights on. Around 3:20 a.m., the door opened, and a man walked in alone. I heard the doorbell and looked automatically, like I always do. At first glance, he didn't seem unusual. Maybe in his mid-40s, simple clothes, dark jacket, nothing that stood out. He walked straight to the counter without looking around and stared at me for a second before speaking. His demeanor wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't normal either. It was too direct. He ordered a simple sandwich and a black coffee. I wrote down the order and told him the total. He pulled money from his pocket and placed the exact amount on the counter, without counting, without hesitation. Not a coin more, not a coin less. I took the money, rang up the order, and sent it to the kitchen. While waiting for it to be ready, I felt like he was still standing there in the same spot. When I looked again, he hadn't moved. He was still staring at me without a clear expression, like he was just observing. It wasn't the normal look of a customer waiting for their order. It was too fixed, without breaking eye contact. I tried to act normal, grabbed a cup, poured the coffee, and placed it on the counter for him. He picked it up slowly without taking his eyes off me and walked to a table farther away, near the window. He sat down and kept looking in my direction, even after holding the coffee. The order was ready a few minutes later. I took it to his table, placed it in front of him, and said something automatic like, "Here you go." He didn't respond, he just stayed there staring. The sandwich was hot, the coffee steaming, but he didn't touch anything. He rested his hands on the table again and kept looking at me directly. I started to feel uncomfortable, but I tried to ignore it. I went back to the counter, started cleaning things, working on the system, anything to look busy. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. At times I glanced over, and he was still in the same position, not touching the food, not looking away. After a while, it really started to bother me. I was used to strange customers, drunk people, overly quiet people, But this was different. There wasn't a clear reason, but it felt wrong. I went into the kitchen and quietly asked the other guy if he had noticed the customer sitting near the window. He took a quick look and said the guy just seemed weird, but nothing major. He told me to relax, that people like that show up at night all the time. I tried to accept that, but when I went back to the counter and looked again, he was still exactly the same. The coffee level hadn't dropped. The sandwich hadn't been touched. Time passed and it felt heavier. The diner was completely empty, just the three of us. The clock in the corner showed around 4:10 a.m. I started noticing small details, like the fact that he barely blinked, or at least it seemed like he didn't when I looked. His posture didn't change, hands in the same place, body slightly leaning forward, like he was focused specifically on me. At one point, I pretended to organize things closer to his table, just to walk by and see if he would react. When I got closer, he slightly tilted his head, like he was tracking every step I took. I felt immediate discomfort and went back to the counter faster than I intended. This had gone beyond just a weird customer. There was something about him that didn't fit. I tried to focus on other things, checked the register, went over inventory, anything to keep my mind occupied. But every time I looked up, he was still there, the same way. At one point, I realized he wasn't just looking. He seemed to be waiting for something. I couldn't explain it properly, but it felt like someone who already knew how things were going to end. Around 4:40, he finally moved. It was very subtle. He slowly pushed the chair back and stood up. He didn't touch the food, didn't take the coffee. He just stood there for a second, still looking at me. My body froze automatically. He started walking toward the counter, unhurried, calm steps. When he got close, he leaned slightly forward, resting one hand on the counter, like he was about to say something quietly. I stood there waiting, not knowing what was coming. Then he spoke in a low voice, almost too normal. "You leave at 6:58, always a few minutes before 7. At that moment, it felt like the ground dropped out from under me. That wasn't something any customer could know. I had never told anyone my schedule there, especially not someone from outside. And the detail of 6:58 wasn't even the official schedule. It was my habit. I always finished things a few minutes early to leave as soon as possible. I stared at him, trying to understand if it was some kind of joke or if there was a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. He didn't smile, didn't change expression. He just looked at me like he had said something completely normal. I didn't respond, I couldn't. He stood there for a few more seconds, maybe waiting for a reaction, but I stayed silent. Then he gave a small nod, like he had confirmed something to himself, and turned away. He walked to the door with the same calm as before. When he opened it, the cold air came in along with the sound of the empty street. I took a step forward without realizing it, like I wanted to see what was happening outside. That's when I noticed it. In the parking lot, directly in front of the diner, there was a car parked, with the engine running and the headlights on. He walked out without looking back and went straight to the car, like everything had already been arranged. He opened the driver's door, got in, and stayed there for a few seconds with the engine still running. I stood behind the counter looking through the window, trying to understand if it was over or if something worse was coming. The car didn't leave right away. It stayed there, headlights shining directly at the diner's front. That gave me a very bad feeling, like he was still there for a reason. I walked around inside and went to the door, staying on the inside without opening it. The view through the glass wasn't perfect, but I could see the car clearly. Then something happened that froze me again. The car's interior light turned on for a second, and I could see him looking straight into the diner. It wasn't a casual glance, and it was fixed just like before. Even from that distance, you could tell he was looking directly at me. Then slowly, he reached toward the dashboard, turned off the interior light, and the headlights remained on. Story 6. I am 23 years old and I live alone in a small apartment in Phoenix. I moved here because of college and ended up staying after I started working part-time in remote technical support. My routine is pretty simple. I spend a lot of time on the computer, especially at night, because that's when I have more peace and quiet. The apartment is one of those compact ones with the living room and kitchen combined, a bedroom separated by a simple door, and a small bathroom. Nothing fancy, but enough. On the night this happened, I was awake later than usual, around 1:30 a.m., finishing some things on my laptop. The TV was on just for background noise, low volume, and the rest of the place was completely silent. My phone was on the table next to the laptop, and when it started ringing, I immediately found it strange. It wasn't common for anyone to call me at that hour. I picked it up and saw it was an unknown number, no identification. I hesitated for a second, but I answered. I didn't say anything at first, just held it to my ear, waiting for the person on the other end to speak. But nothing came. No voice, no clear noise, just silence. A strange silence, the kind that doesn't feel normal for a phone call. I stayed like that for a few seconds, listening until I started to notice a very faint sound, like breathing. It wasn't loud, but it was there. Rhythmic, too close to the microphone. I listened for a few seconds, trying to decide if it was real or just some kind of connection noise. But the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. It was breathing. Slow, steady, like someone holding the phone very close to their face. I didn't say anything, I just hung up. When the screen went dark, I stared at the phone, maybe expecting some explanation to come to mind. It didn't. The apartment was still silent, except for the low sound of the TV from the living room. I tried to ignore it and went back to my laptop, but I couldn't focus on anything. My body was already tense, that alert feeling without a clear reason. Not even 10 seconds passed before the phone started ringing again. The same number. This time I didn't answer immediately. I just stared at the screen vibrating on the table, thinking about what to do. The ringtone seemed louder than before, more insistent. I ended up answering again, but this time I said a firm hello, trying to sound normal. No response, just the same silence, and then again that breathing. A little clearer this time, or maybe I was just paying more attention. That's when something different happened. While I still had the phone to my ear, I heard the same sound coming from somewhere else. At first I thought it was an illusion, some kind of echo from the call itself. But it wasn't. The sound wasn't only coming from the phone pressed to my ear. It was coming from the apartment too. More specifically, from the bedroom. I froze instantly. I stayed still, trying to listen more carefully. The breathing on the phone continued, low and steady, and at the same time, there was an almost identical sound coming from inside the bedroom through the closed door. It wasn't loud, but it was enough for me to realize it wasn't coming from the same place. My heart started racing, and I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear, without hanging up, just to confirm, and it confirmed it. The sound was still on the phone and also in the bedroom, two different sources. I stood there in the middle of the living room, staring at the bedroom door as if that would change anything. The door was closed, like I always kept it at night. The light inside was off. There was no reason for anyone to be in there. I had been alone in the apartment since earlier. Still, the sound was there. Low, steady, like someone breathing slowly. My first reaction was to think someone had gotten in, but that didn't make sense. The front door was locked and I hadn't heard anything. I stood there for a few seconds, unable to move, just staring at the door and trying to figure out what to do. My mind raced for a logical explanation, any explanation, but nothing fit. The sound continued, both on the phone and from the bedroom. The same breathing in the same rhythm. I started walking slowly toward the door without even realizing it, like it was automatic. Every step sounded louder than it should. The floor made a slight creak, which only made everything more tense. When I got closer, the sound became clearer. It wasn't loud, but it was close enough to leave no doubt it was coming from inside. I stopped just a few inches from the door without the courage to touch the handle. I just stood there listening. The breathing continued until suddenly it stopped. Abruptly. At the same time, the phone in my hand went completely silent too. No breathing, no noise, just the empty call. I waited for another sound, any movement from the other side of the door, but nothing came. The silence was worse than the noise. After a few seconds, the call dropped on its own. The phone screen went dark and the entire apartment became quiet in a way that felt wrong. I stood there staring at the door, trying to decide whether to open it or not. My body was completely frozen, like any decision could make things worse. After a few seconds, I took a step back. It didn't feel like a good idea to go into that room at that moment. I slowly went back to the living room, still looking toward the door, as if I expected it to move on its own. I picked up the phone again and checked the number from the call. It was the same, no identification, No history. I thought about calling back, but immediately dismissed it. It didn't feel like something I wanted to provoke. I tried to distract myself, turned the TV volume up a little, but it didn't help. My attention stayed locked on that short hallway leading to the bedroom. At some point, I heard a faint sound coming from there again. It wasn't breathing this time. It was more like a small movement, something being touched or adjusted. I held my breath without realizing it. I listened. The sound came again, very subtle. Then the phone in my hand vibrated, another call, the same number, and this time before I even answered. A phone started ringing inside the bedroom. The sound was unmistakable. It was a phone ringtone, but not mine. It was clearly coming from inside the room, muffled by the door, but loud enough to leave no doubt. At the same time, the phone in my hand kept vibrating with the incoming call. Two different ringtones synchronized. A cold feeling ran through my entire body. I stood there staring at the door, trying to convince myself there had to be some simple explanation for it. There wasn't. The ringing from inside the bedroom was real, happening right there at the same time my phone was ringing in my hand. I slowly started walking toward the door again without taking my eyes off it. Every step felt harder than the last. When I got close, the sound of the phone inside the bedroom was clearer, like it was somewhere near the door. I slowly raised my hand, almost touching the handle, and at the exact moment my fingers touched the metal, both ringtones stopped. At the same time, a dry silence took over everything. No phone in my hand, no sound from inside the bedroom, nothing. I kept my hand on the handle for a few seconds, unable to turn it. I stood there with my hand on the handle, not knowing whether to turn it or not. My mind was racing, trying to anticipate what might be on the other side. After a few seconds, I slowly let go and took a step back. It didn't feel right to open it. Not at that moment. I kept staring at the door, waiting for some kind of reaction, but nothing happened. The silence remained heavy, almost artificial. I went back to the living room and sat on the couch, not taking my eyes off the hallway. My entire body was on alert, like I was waiting for something to happen at any second. A few minutes passed with no sound. I started to think maybe it was over, that it had all been some kind of absurd coincidence. But then very slowly I heard a sound coming from the bedroom. It wasn't the phone this time, it was something lighter, like a finger tapping on wood. One tap, then another, and another. Slow, spaced knocks from the other side of the door. My body froze again. I stared at the hallway without moving. The knocks continued for a few seconds and then stopped. And right after that, the phone in my hand vibrated once more. Another call, same number. This time I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen until the call ended on its own.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.